Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So we had some pretty big news come out of the OCG over the weekend, as there were several reveals for new cards from Legacy of Destruction, which is the core set coming after Phantom Nightmare. The main thing that I think players are super excited about is the Lightsworn support, which actually looks really amazing. Kind of weird, but I think about how crazy these cards would have been had they come out 10 years ago or so, and it sort of blows my mind. Realistically, they're probably just good to very good cards in the context of today's game. However, there are a couple of other generic cards, as well as support for ancient gears to discuss as well. So what we're doing in today's episode is discussing those cards currently trending on the market here in the TCG because of these new OCG reveals. Let's get started. To kick things off, we're taking a look at a few Lightsworn cards, starting with Manura, the Exalted Lightsworn. Now, originally this card was a YCS prize card, but eventually it did get reprinted in Battles of Legend Light's Revenge, which was the first Battles of Legend set to ever come out. Manura is a pretty good card itself. It's a generic rank 4 monster that lets you mill 3 cards from the top of your deck, and then draws you a card for each Lightsworn that you mill. It also has a trigger effect that mills cards when it's destroyed, and potentially allows you to pop cards as well. Now, Lightsworn hasn't been a really popular deck over the last several years, and because of this, Manura has seen limited applications within the format. However, the new Lightsworn support, which includes 2 really cool level 4s in Dragon of Lightsworn and Weiss Lightsworn Archfiend, should help to make summoning Manura even easier. Of course, Felice and Wolf are both level 4s as well, though you do have to get lucky and mill them. But then again, if you're playing Lightsworn, getting lucky with mills was always going to be a part of your strategy. Now, in terms of price, this card has seen a pretty big surge upwards, but actually there's a couple of jumps that we've seen recently. This card was at around $5 to $7. Within the past few weeks, we've actually noticed that it went up to around $10 or so. I don't have any sort of confirmation of this, but I believe that this was being viewed as a tech option in tier limits, since they're looking for additional ways to mill cards, and they are able to make rank 4 monsters fairly easily. However, with the new Lightsworn support revealed, the card has jumped all the way up to between $20 and $25 per copy. This one is a bit crazy. The Lightsworn support probably isn't going to land here in the TCG until around May of 2024. However, we also have to keep in mind that we have Battles of Legend Chapter 1 coming out in February 2024 as well. That set will reprint a bunch of the major cards coming out from all of the different Battles of Legend sets, and even though Manura isn't officially confirmed to be in there, given that Manura has no other reprints and came out in the first Battles of Legend set, it should be a pretty safe assumption that Manura will be included. Overall, I do think this is a great card for one of the most popular archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh history, and I do understand if you want to hold on to the card for sentimental reasons, but for everybody else, I'd recommend trying to offload the card over the next couple of months, and just look to pick up a reprint closer to the release of the Lightsworn cards. Up next, we have Punishment Dragon. So if you skipped a couple of years of Yu-Gi-Oh there, this card may not be all that memorable. Back in Code of the Duelist, which is the set where Firewall Dragon came out, we had a bunch of the Lightsworn cards released called the Twilightsworn. Basically, they're dark versions of Lightsworn monsters. In all honesty, they were pretty bad and never actually managed to do anything. I think that their purpose was that they could interact with banished Lightsworn monsters, but Lightsworn weren't really relevant at that point, and the new cards didn't do anything to change that. Now, fast forward to what will be 2024, and we have our next wave of Lightsworn support, and one of the most notable cards is called Enlightenment Dragon. This card is absolutely insane. It's a fusion monster that can be special summoned by banishing a Judgment Dragon and Punishment Dragon from your field and graveyard, one from each place. It has a quick effect where you can pay 2,000 life points to banish all other cards on the field, as well as all cards in both players' graveyards. It mills 4 cards during the end phase, and if it's destroyed by your opponent, it summons back both Judgment Dragon and Punishment Dragon for free. So because of how strong Enlightenment Dragon is, a lot of players are looking for Punishment Dragon to be able to go into the card. Now, because you're not using a regular fusion method to summon Enlightenment Dragon, so you can't just use King of the Swamp or anything like that, I'm not too sure if Punishment Dragon is a card that we're gonna have to run as a 1 of Brick, or if there's a way to maybe change the name of a card on the field or in the graveyard to Punishment Dragon so that you can just cheat it out. I guess with the new level 4 Dragon of Lightsworn, the card is still searchable as well, so maybe it will be just a 1 of tech that you can always have access to. Anyways, despite the rest of the Twilight Sword cards being reprinted in the 2018 Megatins, for some reason Punishment Dragon wasn't in there, so this card did balloon in price. It was literally $1 to $2 like last week, but now it's around $15 on TCG Player at the time I'm making this video. I do think that the card's price will come back down gradually, and I certainly expect it to be reprinted in an OTS tournament pack closer to the release of Legacy of Destruction. That said, I'd probably recommend just offloading these before they tank back down to a more reasonable price level. There's one other Lightsworn card I want to look at for today, and it's Charge of the Light Brigade. So a lot of the time when I see a new support or a new archetype, one of the first things that I'll look for is an existing card that can help with consistency. Searching is always going to be a key thing that top tier decks are going to try to do. It should come as no surprise then that players are looking at Charge of the Light Brigade. It mills 3 cards from the top of your deck and then searches for any level 4 or lower Lightsworn monster from your deck. Now there are 2 new level 4 monsters coming out in Legacy of Destruction, including Dragon of Lightsworn, so basically you now have a line of play to go from Charge of the Light Brigade to Judgment Dragon, which would have just been crazy back in Edison or Teledad format. This card used to be limited to 1, and it's pretty easy to see why once you look at all of the crazy targets that this card can search out. While the deck itself may not be as strong come May, I have no doubt that Charge will be run at 3 in all Lightsworn decks. Now in terms of price, Charge is a bit messy. This card has a ton of different common printings, but not a lot of holos are available. The original secret rare from the Duelist Genesis looks really nice, but they are quite expensive. It's worth noting that there's a significant gap in price between the Unlimiteds, which are around $50, and the First Eds, which are around $190 to $200. This is because first edition Duelist Genesis was a lot harder to find than the Unlimited printing. The other holo printings are a couple of super rares from a special edition and then Astral Pack 5, and then it has a gold rare printing as well. All of those are actually quite old, and there's not very many of each available on TCG Player right now. Based off of the sold listings, you're probably looking at having to pay anywhere from $5 to $10 per copy. Of course, there are a ton of commons that should only be $1 or so, and of course we should expect this card to be reprinted closer to Legacy of Destruction as well. This is a card that players were already looking for because of things like Edison format, so there's a good chance that if this was in your bulk, you've already dug it out. But for now, see if you can take advantage of the Lightsworn hype and offload any extra copies that you may still have for an inflated price. Okay, so this one may not be specifically Lightsworn related, but I did see someone posting about this card earlier today. It's Revolution Synchron. So this card was the most hyped card to come out of Duelist Nexus. It lets you use it in your hand and then a level 4 or 5 monster on your field to summon a level 7 or 8 Dragon Synchro monster. And then if you have a level 7 or higher Synchro on the field while it's in the graveyard, you can mill a card to special summon this card back as a level 1. Now when this card came out, players thought that it was just going to break the game because theoretically it's a really strong card. However, the decks that we did see in the game as part of the meta, such as Unchained, Pearly, Rescue Ace, and Labyrinth, just never really had any sort of way to use it. I think that the closest thing that we saw was Tearlament, but even then it was just outclassed by other builds. Now, however, I think players are thinking that Lightsworn may be a deck that can actually use the card. They run a bunch of level 4 monsters, and you have an in-archetype Lightsworn called Michael, and then when you revive the Revolution Synchron, you can then climb into the new Synchro, which is Minerva Lightsworn Athena. I don't know how good this would actually be in practice. It might just be like with Tearlaments where you're better off building the deck differently. I guess a big thing that will depend on is whether or not a Guido and Kelbeck are still in the game at that point. Looking at Revolution Synchron though, the card has certainly fallen in price from its early release days where I think it was a $60 to $70 card. I've been picking up mine for around $20 each. I believe that the card is around $22 on TCG Player right now. It's just kind of weird given how iconic and hyped up the card was early on in the life of Duelist Nexus. The card shouldn't be reprinted until the 2024 tins, which should come out around August, so you still have some time to use the card before that reprint drops. Of course, that will entirely depend on if we'll finally see a meta-relevant deck that is able to use this card effectively, or if it'll just continue to be one of the most overhyped and disappointing cards from within the last year. Alright, moving on to another archetype, we're talking about Ancient Gears, and the first card here is Ancient Gear Ballista. This card is a Link 2 monster that requires Earth Machine monsters to make, so this card did actually pop up in the format a few months ago. It was actually used in the Super Heavy Samurai strategy. I believe that you would search for Ancient Gear box, and then that effect would trigger to search you for another one of your Super Heavy Samurai Pendulum cards. Obviously this was rather short-lived as we saw Scarecrow get hit before the deck really had much of a chance to perform, but now we see Ballista trending once again, but this time it's for the archetype that it was intended to be for, Ancient Gears. We saw several new Ancient Gear cards revealed, and while yes, Ancient Gears probably still aren't meta relevant or top tier, they are a pretty strong deck. They got a spell card that searches for any Ancient Gear spell or trap, and a few things that help them to get additional bodies onto the field, which should help them to OTK more easily. That being said, Ballista's other effect might actually come up now, where you can pop a spell or trap card that you control to make one of your opponent's monster's stats go to 0/0 for the rest of the turn. Because of this new support, Ballista is back up in price once again. I remember for so long this was like a 25 to 50 cent bulk card that no one cared for at all. It went up to $20 when Super Heavy Samurais were a thing, it fell back down to a few dollars when that deck died, and now here we are, the card still only has one printing, and each copy is going to cost you around $15. I feel sort of like a broken record when I keep on saying this, but I do think that this is another thing that should be reprinted closer to the release of Legacy of Destruction. It's a key Link 2 monster for a pretty popular archetype, and while it's not the strongest archetype, it's iconic for those that watched the GX era of Yu-Gi-Oh! One other Ancient Gear card for us to look at, it's called Ancient Gear Fortress, so I feel like if other archetypes had a card like this it would just be crazy, but because it's Ancient Gears, no one really cares all that much. This card is a continuous spell card that stops your opponent from targeting or destroying Ancient Gears in the turn that they're summoned. It also stops your opponent from responding to Ancient Gear cards and effects, and then if it's destroyed it special summons an Ancient Gear monster from your hand or graveyard. I don't know about you guys, but I think that basically ensuring that every single one of your cards is going to resolve is really useful. Now, of course, it's not like you're activating Unchained cards and not letting your opponent respond to them, but Ancient Gears can be a really scary deck still if you don't know what you're playing against. This card only has one printing, and it came out back in the Machine Reactor structure deck, which came out at the same time as the old Dino deck that introduced Overraptor into the game. Believe it or not, this card is only up slightly. At the time I'm making this, there's a couple available for $15 before the price shoots up to $30, but we also don't have any sold listings for anything higher than $15 at the same time. The problem is that this structure deck is actually really difficult to find because it contains a common copy of Max C, so players that wanted Max C have already torn it open. That said, you might actually be able to find a few copies of Ancient Gear Fortress in your bulk if maybe someone opened up the deck for the Max C and just kind of bulked the rest of the stuff from the deck without looking up prices. I could definitely see this card being a super rare in an OTS tournament pack since it only has the one common structure deck printing, but of course only time is going to tell. This is just one of those cards that you have to keep an eye out for because it's an unassuming card that is so easy to skip over because it looks really similar to a lot of other Ancient Gear cards. And finally, one last card for us to talk about for today, it is Illusion of Chaos. So this card came out back in Battle of Chaos, and it's sort of a retrain that feels like half Dark Magician and half Demok. This card has a ritual effect. I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually summon this. Rather, people use its first effect, where you reveal this card in your hand to search for a Dark Magician or non-ritual monster that mentions Dark Magician in its text, which is typically Magician Souls, and then put a card from your hand back on the top of the deck. The thing that you could put back is Illusion of Chaos itself, so you could then dump it with the souls to get it onto the field for free, and then you kind of do things from there. There have been a few times where there's pile decks that tried to make use of this little package, but it's never really been anything too crazy or meta-defining. However, we now have a new card that was just revealed in the OCG, causing this card to catch some people's attention. In the Quarter Century Duelist box, there is a new card called Dragon Magia Master, which I believe is a retrain of Dragon Master Knight. The card requires Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon or 3 Blue Eyes monsters, and then a Chaos or BLS Ritual monster to be used as the fusion material. While this card is on the field, it can negate each a monster, spell, and trap card once per turn, and then if it leaves the field, you can summon a Blue Eyes monster or a Chaos or BLS Ritual monster from your extra deck or graveyard. Now, of course, this is a Dark Magician, Blue Eyes, classic anime sort of retrain, but I think that this card is pretty close to Dragoon in that it's not impossible to actually bring out, and the negates are really useful as well. I could see someone trying this in a pile deck with Illusion of Chaos and Magician Souls, maybe like a King of the Swamp or even Fusion Deployment to cheat out a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Anyways, this card was a secret rare in Battle of Chaos, and then it got a secret rare reprint in the tins this year as well. The originals are around $5, while the reprints are about $3. The other printing of this card worth noting is the Starlight Rare version, which is actually at an all-time low. I remember when they were $200 to $250 each. Now you can actually grab one for only $85. Personally, I've been staying away from the Starlights recently. The market's just too volatile, and whenever I look at one and think, oh, that seems kind of cheap, when I look back and check on it a few months later, I find that they've generally gone down. Now return wise, you are better off just looking at getting a set of the tin reprints for like $7 or $8 and seeing if someone uses this card for some crazy combos down the road. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. You know, for me, I just can't get over how good some of the support that we're getting is now, but it still ends up not being as impactful or as relevant as I first thought. Like, for example, I remember talking with my friends like 10, 12 years ago about how great Dark Corridor would have been if it ever got printed, and now it's out, and it's just like another good card, but nothing game-breaking for them. Kind of like a weird thing to think about for me. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.